Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be forgotten.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Oh, cause very charges.
This is part 2 of a 2-part episode. If you want to learn about the early history of the pyramids, the spiritual and cultural context surrounding them, as well as learning about what life was like for a pyramid builder and answering the question, were they slaves? Listen to part 1. But now we get on to the construction project itself. Just how did these things go up?
What really sets the ancient Egyptians apart is their view of death. To them, death wasn't the end of life, but a new beginning. A transformation from the world of the living into an everlasting afterlife. And such a belief would shape Egypt's most mysterious practice and my favourite subject. Mummification. Although the origins of this enigmatic tradition are only now becoming clearer, the burial of their dead had a strong significance from the very earliest times. This is a typical burial from around 3400 BC. The body is curled into the fetal position and here placed within a reconstructed pit grave, surrounded by the belongings he might have had in his earthly life, like pottery, jewellery, and a palette for preparing cosmetics. Everything that was important to him in life accompanied him into death. And I think that's quite significant because it shows that already 5,500 years ago, the Egyptians wanted to take it all with them. They clearly believed that something happened beyond death. Death was simply a transition into another state of existence when you continued to live, and it was assumed you would need everything you'd needed in your life on Earth. His body was naturally mummified in the hot desert sand, but its placement here may not have been accidental. Because even when dead, the body had to be preserved in order to house the soul for eternity. A skeleton simply wasn't good enough. Skeletons, bones, they are very, very anonymous. And yet, when the soft tissue, the skin, the hair is all present, we are ourselves. And that's exactly what this individual represents. Being face to face with one of the very earliest Egyptians gives us insight into the development of their ideas about the afterlife. It started off as a practical thing, burying the dead in a relatively small space, bundled up, and then it developed these layers of kind of like the symbolism, fetal position, this idea in rebirth into the next world. It's almost like the seed from which the Egyptian funerary belief system evolved. This is the very beginning of a process which would be repeated a millionfold throughout Egyptian history. It's this combination of the esoteric underpinned by the practical, which really does sum up the Egyptians in a nutshell.
Hey, I didn't do my favorite Egyptian god.
Who's your favorite Egyptian god?
Oh yeah, what's your favorite Egyptian god?
Okay,
deity.
So my favorite Egyptian god is Ma'at, the goddess of justice.
Yeah, Maat's pretty cool.
And then she's usually accompanied by Anubis and Amit. Amit is the eater of souls, and it is depicted as part hippo, part lion. And apparently these were the most terrifying things they could come up with in Egypt, because hippos are really vicious. Like they will
hippos are terrifying.
They will murder you. They look cute when they're like swimming at the zoo, or you see them in those nature documentaries when they're like, look at this adorable baby hippo. And then shortly afterwards they'll show you the parent hippo just like destroying something. It's like, wow, those are terrifying.
Oh yeah, they'll fuck you up. They'll like bite you in half.
Fun fact about Maat, their consort was, I'm going to say it both ways because people will yell at me either way, Thoth, or Tot, because it's either way, who brought writing to the Egyptians, who is my favorite Egyptian god, because Soundboard Demon's actually a language nerd.
I like Basset, or Bast. Like the fact that cats, like, co-evolved themselves so hard that a culture made a god surrounding them. That's hilarious. And yeah, she was the god of domestication and the home and fertility and childbirth, but she was also the god of cats, because she was a cat. She was a black cat. So let's talk about the actual construction of these things. So, first off, they were expensive. So, firstly, you have to take 25,000 people away from hunting or farming or full-time work elsewhere in the Empire and put them towards this mega project. And you're going to pay them for 20 plus years of labor in the case of the Giza pyramid. Those 20 years of labor with all those people equal out to about 1 billion hours of labor to pay out. I don't know if they paid hourly, but just give you an idea. Not only do you have to pay for these people, you likely have to buy them tools to maintain those tools, buy them supplies, buy them different infrastructure things they need, cut and transport these stones, and build things that will aid them in cutting and transporting these stones. Not only that, but for those 20 plus years, you have to support these people's daily needs. You have to fund building them shelter. You have to fund butchering entire herds of livestock and cattle every day to feed them. You have to have hundreds of gallons of beer and wine ready for them daily. You have to make sure that thousands of gallons of fresh water are available. These are people working hard in the hot sun, and you don't want heat exhaustion to put a crimp in your construction project, especially if you want to keep these thousands of workers happy, or at least productive.
I do want to point out that, it was Richard did specifically say that he's pretty sure the pyramids were built from the bottom up, not the top down.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw that out there as a suggestion that they maybe started at the bottom and then kind of work their way up.
Yeah, that's usually the easiest way.
Yeah, that's what I thought, I mean, I'm not an engineer or nothing, but yeah.
I feel like
they
built the basement first.
Pour the concrete, make sure you get your water supply, then you start to build the pyramid.
Yeah.
So helium balloon pyramids, I do like that idea. You just use a bunch of helium balloons to help levitate it.
Or the great balloon kerfuffle that I call back to that episode that I did about balloons and kerfuffles.
What are balloons for? Killing some fishermen.
Yeah. The correct answer to how much resources it requires to build a pyramid is all of them.
Yep. All of the resources.
Oh yeah, pyramids were a resource hog. Like I think I mentioned earlier, the 2 million stones of various sizes that had to stick together. That doesn't count the shitloads of quartz sand. You see, there was a theory that the way that Egyptians cut these giant stone blocks with copper tools is by putting quartz sand in the cutting grooves and then grinding on that, and the quartz would be doing most of the cutting instead of the copper tools. Modern truckloads worth of this sand. Then you have all the materials you need to maintain your tools, and all the materials you need to do all the steps in the process, and the materials you need to transport it. Wood and stone and sand and water and all different types of things, and likely thousands and thousands of pounds of them each for years.
Oh yeah, everybody who worked on the pyramid was doing the work of the pharaoh and the gods. So you're part of this great society doing great things. So you really believe that you're part of this greater purpose. I mean, I guess you're literally doing God's work.
Yeah, and doing God's work was very apt. Like I said before, when you look back at writings of the time made by these craftsmen, made by these masons, you see that they, although they feel they're being worked hard, they know it's a hard job. They feel blessed. They feel lucky to be working on the project for the God King or the Pharaoh or whatever higher purpose they believe this building serves their culture. They are happy to be a part of it. Let's get into just how these things were built. Now, a caveat. There are lots of different theories as to how these things are built. We have no solid evidence as to whether the Egyptians stuck with one way or another, or whether they switched methods, or whether different project leads had different methods of transporting, cutting, placing stones, etc., etc., etc. So this is me simplifying a lot of theories that people who study this stuff believe in. Step number 1. The pyramid is designed and a location is picked. Using ancient but oddly familiar techniques, the person selected as the project lead, the person leading the pyramid build, along with some advisors, would draw out something that looks very familiar to our modern eyes, at least if you have ever worked in the trades, blueprints. They design all the inner chambers, they design the walls, they design everything the pyramid may need on papyrus first, drawing it out level by level. From there, they determine how many stones they need, where they need to place them, and just what order they need to be placed in so this whole thing is stable. So even at step 1, it gets complicated already. You're designing a blueprint to account for over 2 million stones sometimes, and many, many labyrinths of rooms within the pyramid. It's a hard build. It's a hard thing to plan ahead of time, but they needed to plan ahead of time, or they would end up with another bent pyramid, or a pyramid that didn't fit together quite right, and that was not going to be enough for the God King. And then, after they were done the blueprints, they would select a location for this pyramid to stand. And just to give you an idea of the sophistication of these people back then, so they didn't have lasers, they didn't have professional equipment, they didn't have professional surveying equipment. The Pyramid of Giza, the point of it, was designed to line up with true north. So they had to start from the bottom and build up until the point at the top lined up with true north. You know how close they got? 1/20th of a degree off of true north. There's a lot of contractors and surveyors out there in the world that say, even with modern equipment, I don't think I could get the point of the pyramid as close to true north as the Egyptians did. And the Egyptians were able to get it pointing towards true north by starting at the bottom and just using math and architectural blueprints, planning techniques, to know exactly where that point at the top was going to end up. And they were 1/20th of a degree off.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah. No, the Egyptians were expert astronomers, and they aligned all of this stuff using the stars to align them to the stars. And thinking about how much expertise that required, and the fact that modern surveyors have difficulty doing it, it's just mind-boggling.
In this land of pyramids, the Great Pyramid is pure perfection. It's not just a huge pile of rocks neatly placed on top of each other.
Okay, so everyone talks about the great precision of this pyramid, but looking at it, it looks a bit rough, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't look too bloody precise, does it?
Made well before mathematics was recognised, 2,000 years before Pythagoras came up with his triangle theorem, its perfect angles and joins make this the most precise and most confounding building in the world. You just need to know where to look.
So you get this angle, where this meets this, and you get the angle of the pyramid.
Yes,
Is
exactly.
that right?
That's right. Now, this angle has to be so precise, because if you're a wee fraction of a degree out where it takes off from the bottom, you're going to be yards out up in the air up there.
What is mind-boggling about the Great Pyramid is that it's a really complex building designed with some very simple tools, the naked eye and a piece of string. For much of it, they used a plumb bob. a string with a weight on the end, and they lined it up to the stars to create one of the most accurate buildings of all time. 45 centuries later, it is still more precise than many modern skyscrapers.
Obviously, the precision was no accident, but how the ancient builders got it so right without modern equipment, no one's worked out until now.
So what are we looking at here?
Well, this is one of the 4 survey points that are absolutely key to understanding how this pyramid was made.
People have been tripping over these survey marks for centuries, but extraordinarily, John Romer is the first to see their significance, to crack one of the pyramid's startling secrets.
That's the 3rd one. That's the 3rd in the line.
Yep.
This one here is really exciting.
He's discovered a one-to-one plan of the pyramid mapped out on the Giza Plateau, right next to the Great Pyramid.
The plan of the pyramid is the pyramid itself, because if you really want to keep something that accurate, the way to do is to make your plan at the same size as the finished thing.
By measuring out the life-size plan with string, the Egyptians were able to get their ancient calculations, cubits, perfect.
Now this is the clincher, and whatever anybody says about what I'm telling you here, and they say, oh, that's all rubbish, they never did this, but what nobody's ever going to be getting away from is if you measure 40 cubits from that point out there, you get exactly the angle of the pyramid. Not vaguely, not nearly, but 51 degrees, 50 minutes.
So what does that tell you? What are we standing on here?
We are standing on a sort of design lab. This is where they controlled the architecture of the pyramid.
And I'm going to say it, Egyptians they're not just known for being huge nerds in the modern era, they are also known historically as just being these epic nerds. When I was in grad school, one of my classmates was from Dubai, and she goes, oh, where are you from? And I said, oh, well, my dad's from Egypt. And she goes, oh, I would have known that. Egyptians are huge nerds.
And I say this as a fellow nerd, Miriam, but it's good to see you following in the footsteps of your predecessors.
Thanks for calling me out like that. Oh yeah, no, I'm not annoyed by that. It's 100% true, 100%.
If you never wanted to be an Egyptologist as a kid, you can't call yourself a real nerd. Sorry, I don't make the rules. It's science.
Yeah, no, that's 100% a fact. 100%. Yeah, I mean, like, even okay, so they were so into this that even like the internal air shafts are aligned to the stars. Like that's how much alignment they did. Not just the center of the pyramid, but like any internal air shafts aligned right. So they pointed to the culmination of Sirius, the dog star, a star in the constellation of Orion, and 2 of the circumpolar stars that rotate around the celestial North Pole. And yeah, those are the only 2 stars that remain permanently visible in the night sky. They never set, and they were pretty much the best metaphor for the king's eternal destiny. He's just like this cosmic ruler in the afterlife. And so pointing upward to those 2 stars is like, yes, this is the king looking down on his monument in the afterlife.
So the blueprints were made, the location was picked, now the infrastructure has to be built. There are some theories that say the stone blocks were floated in with papyrus reed floats being attached to them, maybe with some buoyant leathers and stuff like that. If that was the case, then you have to build the canals to bring these blocks in and out and near the pyramid. If the pyramid is a long way from the river, you have to make a canal that leads right up to it. That's a lot of digging, that's a lot of moving water. If you just drag, pull, push the stone blocks, like some theories have suggested, then you need to build the road. You need to build the road from the quarry, where you're getting the rocks from, although they can come from many different sources, so it may be multiple roads to multiple quarries. If you're using logs as sleds or slats to move the stones, as some theories suggest, or you're building wheels with very primitive axles on the bottom of these stones so that they can be rolled along logs that are greased, as some theories suggest, Then you need to build the lumber mill. You need to build a way to cut down trees and get the trees to your building location, or to the quarry if that's where you're transporting your stones from. Remember those 5,000 full-time and 20,000 part-time workers that worked on the Giza pyramid? And that's at any one time. There was tens of thousands of workers that worked on the Pyramid of Giza over the years, but at any one time, there was 25,000 people there. So more infrastructure. You have to build the little full-time city for the full-time workers to live in right beside the pyramid construction site. You have to build the area out a little bit, maybe flatten it, prepare it or whatever, put up the tents, etc., for the part-time temporary workers. And all the amenities they might need, bathrooms, restaurants, theater districts, like all the stuff they would need in their little communities, whether for leisure or pleasure or quality of life or working on their tools or working on their health, keeping them productive, healthy workers, you would need to build that into that town. So that's another piece of infrastructure that would need to be built. What about feeding these people? That's something that comes into accord. You don't just accidentally have hundreds of extra cattle by accident. Having hundreds of extra cattle would be a waste of resources. So having all these extra animals was planned for years ahead of time. If you want a herd of cattle ready to eat by the time your pyramid construction starts, you have to start that years ahead of time. You have to prioritize breeding with your farmers and with your ranchers so that they can produce more cattle than normal, so you have that giant surplus of cattle you need to feed the constructors of the pyramids. And the fields of crop, which would have to be hundreds and hundreds of acres to feed all these people, fields of fig trees would have to be planted. Hundreds of square miles of real estate would have had to be planned for. This is on top of what they need to feed the citizens of Egypt regularly. This is additional food made for a laborious, energy-expensive job where you need more calories every day to do the work. Literal hundreds of square miles of fruit and vegetables and trees and wheat. And let's not forget hops for the literal lakes of beer that these constructors would drink every day as part of the pyramid project. The infrastructure that would have to be built is massive.
And I think this is why everyone's like, but this is hard. How could anybody ever do that?
Well, especially with ancient technology, especially before like laser levels and like machinery.
Aliens.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Although I've done many hours of research to the contrary, just because it annoys Miriam, I'm going to say yes, the aliens built the pyramids.
Over 130 pyramids would be built across Egypt, and they represent the zenith in royal tomb building. Huge state-sponsored civil engineering projects that used vast resources of materials, manpower, and time. The largest of all, the Great Pyramid of King Khufu, which took over 20 years to build. And in order to build something so ambitious, an entire city was created, specifically to house the construction workers, just beyond this monumental wall.
It's known as the Wall of the Crow, and it separated the silent, sacred space of the dead from the busy, bustling city of the pyramid builders.
This 5-hectare site once housed workshops, bakeries, a tool-making facility, and a fish processing area. For this was an integrated, self-sufficient community of over 8,000 people, who even had their own medical care. Anthropological archaeologist Dr. Richard Redding has been excavating the site since 1991.
Where we are now, this is kind of a big workshop, a big industrial park where there's lots of activity going on. Out here, they were probably producing granite statues, maybe granite columns. We find tools out here. for polishing the granite. We find tools out here for chipping at the granite. It's very well planned. We have 3 streets. We have North Street, Main Street we're on, and we have South Street down there.
So we're walking down Main Street?
You're walking down Main Street.
The pyramid workers lived 2-story barracks.
You would have walked in, you would have been in a very quiet, dark, long, narrow room. This is where they would have slept. There would have been a higher bed for the overseer at each end, and then everybody would have laid down, probably with their head in this direction or the other direction, exactly like this. You would be lying here like this, and this would be your nighttime position.
Very comfortable. Can I try out the overseer's bed?
Sure, you want to try out the overseer's bed there?
Delusions of grandeur. Is it this one or that one?
Yeah, that's the wall. You're right where you are.
Oh, so this is all right. So if I sat down here.
Yeah, the overseer's bed is actually buried under a few centimeters of sand, and the floor here is probably under about a half a meter of sand.
So, oh, this is nice.
Yeah.
I can keep my eye on you now.
That's right. You can see me. If I got up in the night and I tried to sneak out to go someplace, you would see me.
Everything the workers needed was here on site. The team have recovered data that shows that workers consumed 74 cattle and 257 sheep and goats each week. This corral area could hold a week's supply of cattle before more were shipped in from Egypt's grasslands.
You could have almost just-in-time delivery coming down, another small herd coming down from Como Hisson or the Delta coming down and in.
It's a really well-oiled machine. You can see now how efficient the Egyptians were at obtaining their food, bringing it to the right place at the right time for the right people. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
It wasn't just simply the food, it was everything. There was the copper to make tools. There was the stone being brought in here from Aswan and other areas. So a lot of things were coming into here. These were government workers. They got everything from the government.
Step 3. The quarry work begins. You have your blueprints, you pick the location, you built all your infrastructure. Now you can start cutting some fucking rocks. So the tools that the Egyptians had access to were stone tools and copper tools. Quite soft metals, relatively. Now, a copper tool is still good to work with rocks like limestone. Most of the pyramids were made of limestone, but not all of them. There were other rocks. Another rock that was quite soft, that was not easy but possible to cut with copper tools, is alabaster. Alabaster is that brilliant white rock, and it was placed on the outside of the pyramids so they would glitter in the sunlight. Now, a lot of those alabaster blocks have worn away or fallen off with time, but back in the day the pyramid was shiny as those alabaster blocks went up, so they were cut out of quarries too. The stone that's involved that has given historians and Egyptologists the most pause is granite. They use this granite for much of the guts of the pyramid. When you're talking in terms of, like, the stone coffin that the pharaoh's body was placed into to be finally laid, the tunnels to the pharaoh's chamber, the treasure room of the pyramid where all the worldly and riches and all the possessions of the pharaoh were kept to be quote-unquote carried into the afterlife were made of granite. There's even some stopping mechanisms and traps that were made of granite. Like when one pyramid was finished, what they did is they took 3 big granite blocks and they designed it in such a way that when they were finished constructing the pyramid and the pharaoh's body was placed in the internals of it, from the top of the pyramid, they could slowly lower down these big granite blocks. And these basically closed off the way to that chamber. 3 big blocks of granite that blocked your travel as you were going towards the chamber. And that's how they finally sealed it up. That's how they locked it down. Then they placed a bunch of stones on top of them, and those stones were locked in place, protecting the body of the pharaoh. So you see, they used this hard stone quite readily, especially when it related directly to the resting chambers and the treasure chambers of the pharaoh. Now, alabaster has a hardness of about 1.5. Granite has a hardness of 6 to 8. A lot harder than you would think a copper tool could cut, but there's a theory as to how they pulled it off. Now, if you wear away at granite long enough with a copper tool, it will eventually make a groove, but this takes for many, many, many grueling hours, going less than centimeters an hour through this rock, so it could be the way they do it, just back-breaking labor for thousands of hours to cut one rock. That could be the way they do it. But an easier way that's been theorized using technology that they had access to is them pouring sand from the desert, which is 40% quartz, into the groove that you want to make with the saw. That way, if you have a big copper saw going back and forth, really the saw isn't doing the cutting. The saw is applying weight to the sand underneath it, and the sand is doing the cutting. And this isn't lightning fast. This isn't like so much faster than just cutting it with a bare copper tool, but it's about 5 times as fast, which would allow them to cut these stones more readily with the technology they had at the time. And experiments have been done, pouring sand into a saw groove and then sawing away and see how far you get. It's still backbreaking. It'll still take hundreds of hours to cut one granite stone, but it's a way they could have done it with the technology of the time, and it shows just how much dedication these people had.
When Roger tries chisels made from bronze, the results are disappointing.
As you can see, we're leaving a lot of metal and very little stone is flaking off.
Bronze and copper tools of the time are at first sight too soft. Yet a sarcophagus or coffin makes it clear that ancient masons could cut straight edges. Close up, there are striations, marks made by the movement of a hard edge. Mark challenges one of the team to show him the answer.
All right, we have a big block of granite here. So how's this copper going to cut this granite?
We're going to use the saw in a reciprocating or backwards and forwards motion.
Dennis Stocks, an expert in ancient technology, suggests the Egyptians had a trick up their sleeves.
So get started. So you're going to chip a groove, and then you're going to put the copper and slide it back and forth. But how? And that's going to cut the granite?
No, Mark.
Even with teeth, the copper alone is too soft.
Okay, well, what is actually going to do the cutting? It seems to me that copper is just going to blunt on granite. I can't believe it's going to cut the stone.
We're going to put sand inside the groove, and we're going to put this saw on top of the sand, and then let the sand do the cutting. All that needs to be done is to move the saw backwards and forwards in a nice, steady motion.
You don't want to lift it up and get those grains in there?
No, they'll work themselves in as it goes.
Yellow?
Okay. Yeah. That's it. Now, the stone weights at each end of the saw are putting the load onto the sand and causes the cutting. The crystal is forced to score a groove in the stone.
So the copper is only guiding the sand's doing the cutting.
Right.
Now, Dennis, will we see any progress in our lifetime?
Yes, if you came back in an hour's time, you would see about a 4 millimeter cut down into the stone.
You're kidding. In an hour, you'll be 4 millimeters down?
Well, I've been doing a lot of experiments, and I can guarantee that this will cut through the stone at about 4 millimeters an hour.
The Egyptians had more patient or tolerant workers.
What's the problem here?
There's no, without a steady stream of water, you're not getting new material in there to do the cutting action. You're not getting rid of the old powder, which is just interfering with the drill going down.
No, I disagree.
I beg to differ with you, Dennis, because that fine powder is acting like a cushion and a polishing agent.
No, sand acts as a fluid as sand.
I've done it for 25 years in the field, and believe me, I've done it dry, I've done it wet, and the wet is much better.
I think by our 10th sarcophagus, we'd probably know the answer to which one was better.
Yeah.
When it comes to proving he's right, there's no holding Roger back.
The sawing went wonderful once we switched over to using water with the sand. As you can see here, we achieved this in just a few days.
Both methods work, and both produce the same pattern of etched lines as in the old tombs. Meanwhile, Dennis's dry drilling goes on.
These guys did a hell of a job, Dennis.
Well, they've really gone down a fair way.
Well, that's pretty impressive for a few days.
Not bad at all.
Now you got to get your core out of there.
And then just see.
There it goes. Wow! You popped right out of there.
Oh!
Look at
there.
that.
Yes.
That could be fourth dynasty, Dennis.
That's right. We could pass it off easily as a fourth dynasty core.
You got your striations and tapers.
And there's
and
the
everything.
hole that we wanted all the time. Fantastic.
Look at that taper. Look at those striations.
And don't forget, these cuts had to be straight and precise at often exact 90-degree angles, or else the structure wouldn't fit together in the end. It would be affected by millimeters.
Affected by Millimeter is the name of Richard Bigley's sex tape.
That's deep.
It is very effective despite a millimeter, I'm just saying.
And then after you have those blocks cut, you have to get them to the pyramid. Step 4, transportation.
Not really a ton of information, but it's pretty easy to put together rafts that you could use to float the blocks down the Nile. The problem is the Egyptians didn't leave written information. So they didn't put things into the historical record about the detailed how and why. So that's part of the reason why everyone's speculating. It's just like, everyone knows how to build a pyramid. Why would I need to write it down?
Yeah, that's sort of the rub. Like, there's been lots of experiments done where historians and scientists and Egyptologists have used people to reconstruct what construction would have been like. So cutting stone, transporting stone, placing stone, all the steps involved in building a pyramid have been tested independently with a bunch of different methods, and there's been a bunch of plausible explanations for how they pulled off various steps. So here's some explanations for how they cut granite. Here's some explanations for how they transported the stones. Here's some explanations for how they got the stones up the ramps. Here's some explanations for how they lifted up the stones out of the quarry and onto their little lifting platform or float or whatever. There's all these plausible theories, but since we don't have historical records that have exact details as to their methodology and their exact strategies and methods in doing these various steps, we have no confirmation. We have a bunch of plausible answers that could slot in, but we don't have confirmation. I don't know, maybe we'll dig up a new tomb and we'll have some definitive writings that tell us exactly how they did it. But we don't have anything quite like that yet. But we have a bunch of scientifically tested, speculative methods that have been shown to be possible with technology they had at the time.
Yeah. I mean, there are several different ways they could have done this, which is part of the problem. I mean, they had so many different tools to move the blocks and so many different ways to get them up the Nile that it's difficult to really pin down just one. And I mean, it took 20 years. Some teams may have had one great way of moving them up the Nile. Some teams may have had another. I mean, we just don't have the details from each team.
Yeah, so there's the float them down the Nile theory, which comes in two forms. One of them is building a raft and putting the stones on top of that raft. That would also have to involve likely some type of lever technology where they would have to use a counterweight or a counterbalance to lift these stones onto the raft and put it down the river. Maybe it was pulled along the river by some herd animals or whatever animals of burden they have back then. The other form of the float down the Nile theory is they would wrap papyrus reeds with some buoyant air-filled leather bags. There's different variations of how they could have done it, and basically, instead of getting the whole block onto a raft, they would just make it semi-buoyant, so it at least floated in the water and could be dragged in the water. If it's semi-buoyant, it's much easier to transport, and you don't have to worry about keeping it on top of a raft, so it has more planning. It would involve more building of all these float sacks to put on the rock, but it's less problematic and probably would be easier to transport. But we knew if they did it, who knows? It's just another plausible explanation. Then there's the drag along the roads theory, or the push along the roads theory, or whatever you may prefer. Some versions of this, they make some wooden slides that they attach to the bottoms of these stones. They're much like skis that a skier would wear, except they're big and wooden, and they would most often be placed on muddy ground, so there'd be somebody constantly wetting the soil in front of them in some versions of the theories on how they did this. To reduce friction and allow them to be dragged. Now again, some of these blocks were transported up to 800 miles. Holy shit, Romans eat your heart out. So it would be hundreds of miles of slick mud and these rocks being dragged along it. It would be a big long road, like that day in the life Egyptian thing that I went through in the start. That was for a nearby quarry. For this project, it could be weeks or months dragging a rock along a road. Now, there's one plausible explanation that's been tested where they make very primitive half-circle axles that attach to the bottom of the stone, and they are able to put logs that fit in those axles greased with animal fat or whatever other lubricants they could find, and basically it would be able to be dragged along these greased logs on the bottom, and that would provide for fast transport. There's some theories that they just plain old wet the ground in front of them, in front of the rock, and just attached some ropes and just dragged it that way. It would be slower, but it would be simpler. It would require less work on each of those 2 million stones. Remember, there's 2 million stones, so if you had to transport 2 million stones, that's 2 million pairs of axles you would have to attach, 2 million logs, well, I guess 4 million if it's 2 per block. It would get very complicated quickly, and you wouldn't need one for every block. You would probably need a few thousand of them, but still, that would require a lot of work beforehand, more and more infrastructure, so maybe they took the brute force method of just having people push, pull, or drag it without any real stuff beneath it. And there's many other theories. If you Google it, there's a bunch of archaeologists and Egyptologists that have their own theories on how they did this. Some of them have been tested using technology of the time, and some of them haven't. But that's step 4, all the ways they could have transported these stones to the pyramids. Many of these methods have been being tested and shown to be successful with enough manpower, which Egypt apparently had a lot of.
At the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the treasures of the pharaohs are on display. Millions of pieces chronicle the prestigious history of one of humanity's most brilliant civilizations. But paradoxically, only 2 elements are directly linked to the Great Pyramid. Today, Jean-Pierre has an appointment with the man who designed and built the greatest pyramid of all times. Ironically, the only image of Khufu that has survived is just a few centimeters tall, a minuscule ivory figurine discovered by chance in a temple in 1903. Despite the absence of monumental statues or bas-reliefs, Khufu's memory is still very much alive. An enigmatic sphinx, he continues to intrigue the entire world with the mystery of how his pyramid was built. Jean-Pierre also wants to see what he considers one of the greatest treasures at the Cairo Museum, a 4,500-year-old cedar wood sled. Most visitors hardly pay any attention to what seems like some plain, everyday object. Yet, it's a unique piece that offers insight into the pyramid's construction.
Wood was like gold for the Egyptians. It cost a fortune to bring wood from Lebanon, so they use it up to the end.
Back in Khufu's days, the Egyptians didn't know about the wheel. They used these cedar sleds to haul stone blocks. Considering the tools available to them, the Egyptians accomplished amazing technical feats.
Oh, yeah, something I forgot to mention in the different types of stones that make up a pyramid. I know they often use something special for the very tippy top of the pyramid, like the point that points to true north in the Pyramid of Giza's case. What is that called again?
A pyramidion or the uppermost capstone piece of an Egyptian pyramid or obelisk, was made out of sacred Ben-Ben stone. Ben-Ben stone being... Oh, no, sorry. Ben-Ben was the creation myth talking about that sacred mound. It appears to be...
They were generally made of diorite, granite, or fine limestone, and then covered in gold or electrum, which is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver.
Alrighty, boys, girls, people of all genders, you have your blueprints, you have your location, you have your infrastructure built, you have your workers there, you have your stones cut, and you have your stones transported to the pyramid. Now, you got to assemble the thing. Now, the Egyptians learned things about building the pyramids over the years. We talked about the bent pyramid, how the middle was made of sand, so it collapsed inwards as they built it because it wasn't stable. So, in the terms of the Pyramid of Giza, they built it on solid stone, no sand in the middle to be collapsed upon. Generally, they started building from the outside in. Now, a lot of people think of building pyramids like a Lego set. You just got to build the bottom layer and then the second layer and up and up and up and up. But they forget about all the interior rooms, some of which had high ceilings that extended beyond multiple layers, some of which were filled with big chariots or giant wooden throne chairs that are 20 feet high, or big statues in the interior. And some of these required them to go through multiple stone layers, so the people laying the stones had to make sure they had their designs down so that these rooms on the inside would be built as the layers go up. Now, if you believe in the floating theory, that these things are buoyant or on a raft, there could be a channel off of the Nile River that leads far into the desert wherever the pyramids are being built, and these are floated right up to the base of the pyramid. Other plausible versions had them pulling up these stones up 14-degree ramps that slowly wound around the pyramid as it went higher. And don't forget, these pyramids are hundreds of feet tall. So these snaking ramps would go on for long ways. Perhaps there were people on the ramps pulling these stones, or maybe the Egyptians had some type of rigging system that allowed people on the ground to slowly pull these stones up the ramps. These ramps were likely outfitted with some type of grease, or maybe the bottom of the stones were outfitted in a way to make them easier to take up the ramps, or maybe they were just dragged along the ramps. Now, these ramps would have to be replaced on a frequent basis, since the grinding of those stones going over top of them thousands of times would wear them away, so there'd also be a lot of maintenance involved in that.
Their monumental constructions have weathered thousands of years. They bear witness to the genius of these men from antiquity and continue to fascinate Egyptologists and architects today. Bob Breyer is convinced of the importance of Jean-Pierre's theory. He joins him in Cairo to help him find new clues and evidence.
You want a beer? No, just a mint tea.
To prepare for their expedition the next day, they begin by taking stock of some of the building's theories other people have come up with. Most involve some kind of ramp, but have major flaws, according to the architect.
Either it's too steep.
Yeah, that's a big problem with these ramps.
It's a huge problem. Either it's too steep, or it's too long, and then it crosses the quarry.
Because it's too high.
It has to be 1.6 kilometers, and then the ramp would be bigger than the pyramid itself. This one is really steep, good for ski jumps or for the Olympics. It's fine for that.
Tell me, what's this?
Ça, c'est archivé virus. Maybe?
This one is interesting. Yes, because the 1.6 kilometers are not in front of the pyramid, but all around it.
This type of external spiral ramp around the pyramid raises a number of questions. How could such a ramp be attached to a smooth-sided pyramid? How do you turn a corner with 600 men, considering that's how many people you needed to pull a 60-ton granite block? Besides, with this type of external ramp, you couldn't check the geometry during construction. If the edges weren't perfectly aligned and controlled, the pyramid could end up twisted.
But either way, they start with the outermost layer, and then the second outermost layer, and then the third innermost layer, accounting for all the interior rooms on the inside until they get the first layer of the pyramid built. And then they go on to the second layer, and again, they have to look at their blueprints and see which rooms need high ceilings and which rooms can be sealed up. And they have to place stones in a way that they are stable as the pyramid goes up, that no interior part of the pyramid will collapse. Because they believe this to be the permanent home of the pharaoh's spirit. You know, if the room full of mummified horses collapses, then oh no, your pharaoh doesn't have any horses in the afterlife, and he won't be invited to the county club with all the other deities and their horses. So you want your pharaoh to have a horse. So you got to make sure those rooms are stable and even under force of millions of pounds of rock above them. Now, as a binding agent, they probably would have used gypsum. It's a soft mineral that even in modern times is used for different forms of plaster and mortar and drywall and caulk. And in the ancient world, it was used as a mortar between different bricks or blocks.
Embedded in our planet Earth is a truly miraculous crystal formation. A common rock with a white, silky luster. Look deep into this wondrous rock called gypsum as we discover the mystery within. Mined or quarried and processed into a variety of products, the unique qualities of gypsum have been known and put to use for centuries. The Egyptians applied it to the interiors of their pyramids as sandplaster over lath made of intertwined reeds. It has been used as a soil supplement, as an ingredient in toothpaste and in food processing, as a filler in paper and textiles, as plaster of Paris in molding, casting, sculpture, and pottery, and most abundantly in building products such as cement and plaster for walls and ceilings. Gypsum has been used by artists, architects, and builders in various forms throughout the ages. Toward the end of the 19th century, Augustine Sackett discovered a method to control the setting time of gypsum and invented the process for making a gypsum core sandwiched between two sheets of felt paper. This product, typically known as gypsum board, began its phenomenal rise to prominence in the late 1940s as the nation's post-war building boom erupted. Today, tens of millions of square feet of gypsum board are installed in North America every day as an efficient, low-cost method of applying the miracle mineral to walls and ceilings.
Additionally, for any spaces in between the rocks that they didn't account for, they would bake mud bricks to fill in those holes just to make sure that all the things they want to seal are sealed, to fill in any holes. Now, they tried not to make that a habit because they wanted these things to fit together exactly, but sometimes adjustments had to be made and mud bricks had to be used to fill in some gaps and holes. And they would continue for years. The Giza pyramid took 20 years to go up. 20 years of stacking stones one layer at a time. When they got to the layer that contained the burial chamber of the pharaoh, they would line it with hard granite stone, that stone that would take so many more hours to cut than everything else. They would carve the tomb of the pharaoh out of this granite, and often many of his treasure chambers and the chambers where they keep the possessions he wants to take to the afterlife, they would make out of these granite tunnels. As they got to the top, they would coat the outside of the pyramid in alabaster and white limestone. Now, when I say coated, I don't mean they painted the outside. I mean that the last few layers on the outside of the pyramid, these special blocks of very white limestone that would shine in the sunlight, would be used to make that final layer on the outside. Now, as I said before, many of these have worn away over time. Many of these have been stolen off the face of the pyramids. That's why they look in such disarray today. They were much more shiny back then. They sparkled in the sunlight a lot more, and their sides were smooth instead of being rough and broken like they are today from years and years of people stealing and digging and cracking and breaking rocks to take home for their collections and etc., etc. And then you reach the top of your pyramid, and you put your capstone on top. The capstones were often granite, because it's harder, more durable to the elements, and heavier, which will help it keep in place through the years. They then coat that capstone with electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, as Miriam previously mentioned. And then you have your pyramid. Over 2 million stones, 1 billion hours of labor, 100,000 collective workers over 20 years, 25,000 at any one time at the side of the pyramid working on it, drinking lakes of beer and eating herds of cattle every day to sustain them. After 20 years of that, you have your pyramid. Your pharaoh is placed inside. After he dies, the pyramid is often built as he's living, and often the pyramid is sealed. As I mentioned before, sometimes they use giant granite blocks that they drop from the upper pyramid, and they seal the entrance with these giant granite blocks. They seal it so well that even they could not access it again. And then they let their pharaoh have that afterlife party and hope for the best, often returning to the pyramid for ceremonies and religious days.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Master stonecutter Fatih Ali Hamid works on a block of Tura limestone with the kind of techniques that were first used on this site over 4,000 years ago. So that the pyramid would have smooth sides, the outer face of each block was cut to a precise angle. Then it was polished, using a sandstone brick and fine sand as an abrasive. It's a process that takes time, skill, and a great deal of effort.
You can see how much of his body he's putting into this work, too. He's really putting absolutely all of his effort into it. ممكن أنا عايزين. Okay. يعني. لقى أنا مش شديد. Oh. Well, you know, I'm kind of proud of myself. I can already see many of the tool marks disappearing. Just, for example, right here, you can see these tool marks are almost already completely gone.
The aim is a finished product that is not merely smooth, but shining.
We can also see the difference between the unworked side with the incredible bright whiteness of the worked limestone.
The pyramids that we see today are obscured by smog, blackened by pollution.
This is what they actually would have looked like.
This level of workmanship, carried out by hand over the entire surface of the pyramid, would amount to millions of man-hours.
The exciting thing about studying pyramid building is that you learn both about the micro and the macro. Not only did it require incredible skill in these small environments, but also incredible administrative skill to be able to marshal the human energy and power of hundreds, if not thousands of people to build these objects, to bring the objects here, to work them and get them, and then put them up in place.
We can now form a picture of how the pyramid would have looked on the day it was completed. A perfect triangle of white, dominating the horizon and reflecting the powerful Egyptian sun with a dazzling glare.
It must have truly added to the impression of Giza as a magical port city bathed in sunlight, if not actually existing ethereally in the celestial light.
All right, there are a lot of myths, legends, and falsehoods from surrounding the pyramids, and we briefly went over some of them, like the biblical myths that indicate that the pyramids were built by Hebrew slaves, or the general myth that the pyramids were built by slaves. There's also, the biggest one is that there's only one Great Pyramid, but it's actually part of that whole Giza necropolis of the 3 pyramids. And the whole necropolis also includes the Great Sphinx, 6 smaller pyramids of the queens, and some other smaller buildings. There's also the myth that the pyramids are in the middle of the desert, but they're actually not. They're right outside of Cairo. And you can actually have a restaurant meal and look out at the pyramids. There's also a ton of hotels. You could probably, I think last I heard there was like an Applebee's down the road from the pyramids. So go get your Applebee's on and check out the pyramids.
That's wild.
It is wild. Oh my god. Yeah.
I posted a picture in the chat for those that are listening with us of where the Great Pyramid of Giza is, and the other 2 pyramids sitting there. And as you can see, just north of it is a police station, a Marriott hotel. The Sphinx is literally like, what, 150 meters from a road and an inn?
Yeah, that's wild.
There's also the myth that the pyramids were only used as royal tombs, but I touched on it a little bit earlier before that they had some religious significance. There's also their use as a huge sundial, because there are marks on the Pyramid of Giza that align with each hour, and it also is used to signal solstices and equinox that help mark the solar year for the ancient Egyptians.
Yeah, that's what you get when you design it so that the point is 1/20th of a degree off of true north. It becomes very accurate to be able to tell the time and the seasons and the passage of the year. Not only a tomb, but a handy 13 billion pound sundial.
That's awesome. This is also one of the coolest myths that I found about the Great Pyramid. The biggest myth here is that the Great Pyramid only has 4 sides, and it actually has 8 sides, making it the only 8-sided Egyptian pyramid. All 8 sides can only be seen from air at either dawn or sunset on the spring and autumn equinoxes when the sun casts shadows on the Great Pyramid.
8 sides?
Whoa.
Are you shitting my balls right now?
Someone put a picture.
Yeah, the Great Pyramid, the one that Khufu built for himself to be buried in. Oh my god, I know.
Yeah, someone put a picture in the chat. I want to see.
Also, Adam from our last episode, or possibly future episode, posted the picture as soon as I did, but there's the 8 sides of the pyramid.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Fun thing for listeners to do. Go on Google Maps, type in the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it'll point you right to it. The marker's literally at the tip. But if you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, you can see there's a line on each of the different sides. But if you look at the Pyramid of Khafra, there aren't those lines, which is how you can tell that the one is 8-sided and the other is not.
And the 8 sides of that pyramid are not convex, pointing out. They're concave, pointing in. And it's just slightly. One of the other myths is that all of the chambers inside the Great Pyramid have been explored and we know everything that's inside, which is actually false. We've only explored about 3 chambers, which is the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Grand Gallery. There are also several secret doors and corridors built to stop grave robbers that we haven't been able to find. The Scan Pyramids project discovered previously hidden chambers in the middle of the pyramid that have not been accessed because we just can't get to it. Can't figure out how. I'm sure we will one day.
Yeah, it's almost like a fun house with like false hallways and paths that lead nowhere and trap exits and, well, I guess maybe I got a lot of that from Indiana Jones and stuff like that. But I have seen actual like writings about structures inside of these pyramids that are made to trick robbers.
Mm-hmm. It warded off some robbers. Obviously, there are a lot of grave robbers who are able to get in and get to things, but they, for the most part, the secret doors and corridors stopped a lot of a lot of the grave robbers.
Yeah, I guess when your lock is around for literally thousands of years, then, people might find a way to open it occasionally.
So, one of the other myths is also that the Great Pyramid is the largest pyramid in the world, but it's actually only the largest of the ancient Egyptian pyramids. The largest pyramid in the world is the Great Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico, and it's the largest in terms of volume.
We are now at Cholula. This is the most sacred of all the places in Anahuac, where our people came from all over Anahuac to see what you see at the base. As you see on top of this Teocalli, which is incidentally the largest pyramid, as it's called, the largest pyramid in the world by volume. The one in Egypt is taller, but this has more volume. So we have built the largest pyramid, Teocalli, in the world. And again, realize that this was used to be climbed, and there were tunnels going on underneath. And this is also the site of the first major massacre of our people, our leadership. This is where 6,000 to 10,000 of our people were massacred by the Spaniards. 6,000 to 10,000 people that were unarmed. 6,000 to 10,000 people that were basically set up for massacre with the help of Malinche. But you see the church on top as a form of like putting a foot on our heritage. This is a way of spitting on our heritage. This is a way of putting a top so that we can't escape from this colonialism. And that's what we of Mexica Movement are doing. We're working on helping our people uncover themselves from their European masks, uncover themselves from the chains, to liberate themselves as a Nicantlaca people, as an indigenous people, to embrace themselves so that we can quicker unmask all of this. And the fact that nobody knew about this, going back 100 years, this was just a hill with a church on top of it. But the Spaniards put the church on there for a reason. It was put there to say, we have defeated you. And what we have to learn is how to say no to them by embracing our own heritage, by embracing our history, by embracing our identity as Nicantlaca, as indigenous people, as Mexica, as the people of Anahuac, as a people who are beginning to wake up.
And I mentioned this before, but the Great Pyramid is not the first pyramid in Egypt. The first pyramid complex was a step pyramid complex in Saqqara, which was 4,700 years ago. And then several hundred years later, you had Pharaoh Sneferu with the bent pyramids. Here are some cool legends about the pyramids. So in 1798, Napoleon took an expedition to Egypt, which is largely regarded as the beginning of Egyptology. And although it's claimed that he climbed to the top of the Great Pyramid, he really just made a mental calculation estimating that all the stones in the pyramid could be used to build a wall around the world. He pretty much just enjoyed looking at stuff and making mental calculations based on it, which I'm not 100% sure that's an accurate assessment. He did go inside the Great Pyramid and went into the burial chamber with an entourage. He asked to be left alone, and when he came out, he looked ashen, and when people asked him if he was okay, he would only say, "Never mind, you'll never believe me." Nobody actually knows what he saw. He never told anybody, and he died without revealing the secret.
So maybe I'm just doing some armchair psychology, but the fact that he went to his grave with this secret, I think, is telling. Like, he could have made something up to make more attention, but, like, from how you characterize it, it seemed like he didn't want to talk about it, that he wasn't interested in revealing it. He genuinely thought these people wouldn't believe him. He was almost frustrated by his own truth.
Right, and it's really bothered people for several hundred years.
There was a small child mooning him, and he was just terribly upset.
How dare.
Maybe he just saw the end of the Batman vs. Superman movie.
Oh, sure.
Save Martha.
Herodotus went to Egypt around 450 BC and wrote details about his entire trip. However, he made claims about the pyramids and basically made up a bunch of stuff based on whatever he was thinking at a time. So he made some claims, including there were inscriptions of the amount of onions and bread required to feed the workmen. He claimed that it required 90,000 men, largely slaves, working for 3 months to build the pyramids. But the pyramids were 2,000 years old, and there were detailed inscriptions by the laborers indicating how they built the pyramids. But he didn't really use any of that information.
Yeah, like he's the guy that wrote down what happened during the Persian Greco Wars. That's where the 300 movies came from. The real life example is even more dynamic, I think. And, well, I guess, unfortunately, when I say real life example, it's most of his writings from Herodotus. A guy who has been proven multiple times to make stuff up and just not do his research, even if it's widely available. History is tricky. That's why a lot of historians are very careful about what they claim about the historical record, because even primary sources like Herodotus that wrote stuff down and we now have his writings, apparently occasionally, or even more occasionally, we don't really know, made stuff up and didn't do his research. Now, that being said, that is a drastic simplification of Herodotus's. He has written accounts that match the historical record pretty readily and match other accounts of other primary source authors pretty readily, but he still has been proven to be unreliable at times, which makes his claims in some of his writings hard to believe.
He just made some stuff up. And then he said that the Egyptians used machines to build the pyramids, but he didn't specify what kind of machine. He just said they used a machine.
Ancient secret crane.
Yeah, it was that earth mover, the one that they used to dig out the evergreen. That's how old that thing is. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be mean about it, but my cousins in Egypt were the ones sharing the most memes about that thing.
So we should recreate that on the South Saskatchewan, is what you're saying?
Yeah, Herodotus was basically like, man, let me see here now. That pyramid looks pretty big. Probably required a lot of slaves to build it. I'm like, my dude, just because they use slaves all over Greece doesn't mean that's how they did it. Also, 90, where did you get that number? Please show your work.
Yeah, like Herodotus, love you, dude. It seems like you just take a look at the battlefield or the group of people or whatever. You just fucking eyeball it. Like, you don't ask anybody or you don't count a row and then do the math. You're just like, 90.
Yeah.
90,000 is the answer. Just just a little bit of forethought would be great.
I'm gonna say it took 3 months to build the pyramids. Sure. Okay. You do you, my dude.
Yeah, he was off by a large factor. Like, there's other historical accounts and archaeological evidence, and just basically doing the math of the amount of people that were involved and the amount of stones moved and how long it would take to move those stones. There's no way he could have been built in 3 months in the case of the Pyramid of Giza. 2 million stones. Like, the factor that he's wrong here, I just did the math, that's like saying that the Empire State Building was built in 5 days, which it wasn't.
There's also a lot of misinformation about the pyramids and how they were built and who built them. And a lot of that comes from shows like Ancient Aliens and books like Chariots of the Gods. And Chariots of the Gods has a question mark on the end because it's asking the question, Chariots of the Gods? Aliens have actually built things? And a lot of this misinformation comes directly from Herodotus saying they used machines to build the pyramids. Machines? Ancient civilizations didn't have machines. It must have been aliens.
Mind you, that said, a simple machine could include an inclined plane or a ramp. So to say they weren't built by machines is
But
maybe
they're not
a bit
thinking
of a
that way.
misnomer.
They're just being extremely ignorant and saying, well, these ancient texts say machine. This looks really complicated. Therefore, that machine must be something super complicated that ancient person couldn't have come up with. Therefore, some sort of superior advanced civilization must have come down from the heavens and built these, and these ancient civilizations thought they were gods. And it's just ridiculous.
In comparison to many of the gods, Osiris was actually thought to have lived physically on Earth as one of Egypt's pharaohs. He is often depicted with a winged disk of the sun. And while many scholars have suggested that this is nothing else but to worship the sun, that sun, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, also had wings, and it descended from the sky. So in my opinion, something else was depicted, an extraterrestrial event that in fact took place in real life.
Although most ancient astronaut theorists believe that the Egyptian gods were, in reality, extraterrestrial visitors, there are many who wonder if Osiris was even made of flesh and blood.
One of the most famous stories that go hand in hand with Osiris was that he was dismembered by his jealous brother Seth.
Set went into a fury and tore his brother's dead body to shreds, tore it into 14 pieces, had it scattered far and wide all over the kingdom. But Isis, the loyal wife, searched far and wide and found the pieces and pulled it together.
Isis succeeded in resurrecting him. Now, when I hear a story like that a being is dismembered and then somebody puts together those pieces and then they're able to magically resurrect him, I have to ask the question, is it possible that Osiris was not some type of biological entity, but perhaps he was some type of a machine or a robot?
For ancient astronaut theorists, perhaps the strongest evidence that Osiris may have been a robot can be found in the ancient pyramid texts, which describe the symbol of the Djed pillar as Osiris's spine.
Osiris in his resurrected form was portrayed as a pillar that clearly resembles a modern-day Tesla coil. The Djed pillar was considered a power pillar.
In this one carving at Abydos, it is as if Isis has her hand inserted into Osiris's back. And so perhaps it illustrates how she was manipulating Osiris. Could it be that the story of Osiris is something completely different than what we have thought?
I think the guy most people think of when they think of aliens built the pyramids at this point is Giorgio Tsoukalos of the Ancient Aliens TV show. So he's now saying he never said that aliens themselves built the pyramids. He's only saying that they helped. And in an article with Inverse Magazine in 2018, he said, "What I'm suggesting is that these ancient structures were built with the assistance and engineering knowledge of these extraterrestrials. Why are we suggesting this? It's because that's what the ancient texts are in fact saying, word for word. They're saying that the knowledge came from the guardians of the sky, the watchers of the sky. So the idea is, instead of proposing that these were just a figment of our ancestors' imagination, we are suggesting that our ancestors had teachers." Sure. I guess.
Yeah, and it just shows like a dour view of humanity, like a pessimistic view of humanity, which I understand. Sometimes I have that too, but look at the shit we've pulled off. Like, humanity has a lot of problems, but in terms of building big shit, because we want to build big shit, Like, we've had a long history of that in every civilization that humanity has created. And, like, it just shows that they think that, oh, well, that's really big and that's really hard, so, like, I don't think that these ancient peoples could have pulled it off. Like, that's a simplification, but that seems like the gut feeling that a lot of these people go with.
Well, I'm wondering of that, like what sort of like racial component there is in there as well, you know? While they were constructing this, Europe was, very tribal still at that point, and living in mud
Yeah,
huts.
I'm sure there is a racial component to it. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, in my mind, it's definitely racist. The idea that, well, these strange brown people in their funny hats could never have possibly built such a huge, amazing structure. It must have been aliens, which is just ridiculous. I mean, people do this kind of thing all the time, and it's the same argument people use for intelligent design. I don't understand how this happened, therefore God did it. I don't understand how these pyramids were built, therefore aliens did it, which is ridiculous.
I couldn't pick something up that was heavy, so no one else could.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's called the God of the Gaps theory. Anything you can't readily explain must be divine interference. If I can't understand these specific details, even though I understand everything else, it must have been some kind of other power.
An example of this is the historical quote-unquote philosophical hunt for God. God used to live in the clouds, and then we built airplane, and God wasn't in the clouds, and then they said, well, God has to be above the clouds, but then we built spaceships, and God wasn't above the clouds. So they said, well, God must be in worlds beyond, but we built telescopes and little buggies, and we didn't find God. So now they say, God is in a metaphysical realm beyond our detection. So God always lives in the gaps of our knowledge. And here, there isn't even a gap in the knowledge. Like, constructing a pyramid, start to finish, would be a giant expensive experiment. I previously mentioned it took about 1 billion hours of labor to construct the Giza pyramid. You pay a union wage, you fund all the materials project, pay for the parts, pay for the accommodations and the food for 20 hours. It would be an expensive experiment, so, like, humanity's never going to fund that. It would be $1 trillion experiment by the end. But all the steps involved, cutting stones, moving stones, transporting stones, placing stones in a structure, using the mortars they had at the time, using the materials they had at the time, all these separate steps have been tested, and we've come up with not one, but many plausible explanations for how these could have been done, how the blocks could have been moved and cut. We have multiple explanations. We have so many that people speculate, because they say, well, it could be a combination of any of these options. And there could be examples or methods that we don't even know about, that we didn't know they had access to, or that Egyptians came up with by themselves, and even we have not recreated it, similar to Greek fire. So they're using God of the Gaps because they haven't even done the research enough themselves to learn that those gaps are closing.
But they really ignore the fact that there's archaeological and historical evidence that humans built the pyramids without any divine influence, without any extraterrestrial influence. I mean, at the pyramids, the archaeologists have found copper drills, chisels, saws, and awls, all of which are used to build the pyramids. And all of the quarries nearby are filled with half-finished blocks and broken tools that show exactly how stones were carved by the Egyptians. There's nothing there that indicates there were extraterrestrial beings of any kind. And, I mean, the Egyptians were hugely detailed record keepers. They would have said something about aliens in the hieroglyphs. Maybe any kind of artifact. The aliens may have dropped like a screw or something from their alien ship. Some sort of alien goop left in one of the pyramids, but nothing like that has been found. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it's, even though they say, oh, well, they would have written down if the aliens came. Well, they did write it down. It's just we don't see them as aliens. We see them as gods. And then you get stuff like they thought it was a god, but really the bird-headed guy is just what those aliens looked like. Like, that doesn't really make sense. Okay, but where's the spaceship? It's like, well, see, we think it's a spaceship, but really, or we think it's this goddess going over the earth, leaning over the earth, but really that's what they thought the spaceship was. It's like they didn't write in metaphors in the hieroglyphs. They had detailed record keeping at that time. Like, we have details of a lot of stuff. They would not have metaphorically represented these aliens as an bird-headed god or a jackal-headed god. That just makes zero sense. Make it make sense.
I also appreciate, oh yeah, the bird-headed one, that's what they look like. Oh, the bird-headed one, so not the hippo-headed one, or the scarab-headed one, or the different bird-headed one, or the cow-headed one, or the ibis-headed one, or the cat-headed one, or the jackal-headed one, or the green one, or the frog-headed one.
Right. I mean,
apparently it's a frog-headed one.
Yeah. Like, why would all of the aliens look like stuff from all over Earth? Why would they not just look like something from the alien planet? Like, oh, I'm going to conveniently have an alien form that looks exactly like this human that just happens to have a jackal head. Sure, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a logical mythology that the people of the time could have created using the animals around them, combining them with humans to make them godlike animal figures. No, all these aliens separately evolved to look like humans from the neck down and different animals that surrounded Egypt from the neck up. That's just how it goes, I guess. And I just want them to find one tricorder inside a pyramid. Sealed inside of a rock. Then it's but nothing.
Well, and if you look at modern day depictions of aliens, like a lot of them are like the gray type, the bald, the large bald head with the big black eyes, and that's how they're portrayed or described, in encounters, present day. And it's like, well, it just seems, I don't know, it's just very fantastical, I guess,
First it's, oh, the aliens definitely built the pyramids. And then it's, no, the aliens just helped. Mm-hmm. And then it's, oh, well, the aliens just dropped off the plans and then, left. And you never really get a real argument from them. It's always just, well,
You gotta love that infotainment.
Did Hitler go down to Atlantis and live with Atlanteans after World War II? Find out this evening on History Channel.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
These buildings were built under divine guidance. This is a mark of the gods. They put certain things in these buildings to let us know they are not entirely of human origin. They represent something larger than we are.
The builders wanted to make sure that a future generation would know that there's a discrepancy in knowledge. And what I'm suggesting is that all these ancient structures are calling cards left by extraterrestrials.
Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that evidence of extraterrestrial intervention in the construction and placement of these incredible structures can also be found by examining their alignments with the stars.
If I wanted to leave behind a piece of evidence that suggests where I'm from, one way, for example, is by creating monuments that are in the shape of constellations. In ancient Egypt, the 3 pyramids are aligned with the constellation of Orion's belt. The pyramids are not the only monuments that have this particular configuration.
Just speaking from the point of view as an Egyptian who's been there and seen people using pretty similar to the exact tools, doing the exact same kind of work, it feels like just kind of a punch in the gut being told, oh, your people could never do this, despite the fact that it's right there. I'm seeing it. The archaeological record says, history says, they did it. Why do you have to be like this?
See, one of my favorite, like, I guess, myths or whatever is that the coordinates of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, the speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second, and if you go 29 point and all those as a decimal to the coordinates on north, you end up with a line that goes through the Great Pyramid, and they talk. I guess a lot of people are trying to say, well, they knew something. They were very complicated, sophisticated, and they knew the speed of light, and that sort of thing. And I don't know, like you look at that, and of course it's missing the second half of the coordinates. But if you look at that as evidence of something, then it's kind of like the the bridges on the Lake Houston clubhouse was also speaking to the speed of light, because it's also on that coordinate.
I mean, it sounds really cool, but also there's a difference between your stoner, okay, but what if, and reality.
Well, and I mean, the meter didn't even exist until 1771. So, you know what I'm saying? Eh? Where it's like, well, they wouldn't have had a concept of the meter, and I'm not certain that they would even know. Although it is an interesting coincidence that it passes through. But again, a lot of other coordinates pass through the Great Pyramid as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wouldn't necessarily want to hang my hat on this, And
a lot of people do mistake coincidence for fact, and they think if they line up 100 different coincidences, that makes it some kind of fact. This means something. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't.
That is the gambler's fallacy, that a string of unrelated events are actually a lucky streak, and that's how they got it right.
I wish the gambler's fallacy was correct, because then I might be able to figure out how I got stuff right, and I would never be wrong again.
I would like to know from our Egyptian guest, are modern day Egyptians really proud of their pyramids? Is it a source of national pride?
I mean, the vast majority of Egyptians are very proud of our heritage. They're very proud of the pyramids, and it's really a source of national pride to be able to say you're an Egyptian. And obviously, I can't speak for all Egyptians, but personally, I think they're cool as shit. I mean, I have family in Egypt, and the couple of times we went when I was little, we always went to the pyramids. I got my picture taken on a camel in front of the pyramids.
And one thing I'd like to point out is that they're gigantic. They're huge. They're big structures. I don't know. Fucking dude. But having all those tiny stones stacked up next to each other, it gives the illusion that all those stones separately are tiny, about 4 feet tall, about 3 feet wide, about 10 feet long, 10 tons or 20,000 pounds apiece. They are massive stones, and there's millions of them piled up.
Oh yeah, they are gigantic. It's you see pictures of it, and you see them in movies, and it's something completely different when you're actually there.
Because you're standing there, and when you're there, and it's right in front of you, you can't have that illusion anymore. You see that each of these stones are bigger than you are, and you see this thing extending 400 feet into the sky.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to go back. I miss my family, and I want to go see all the cool stuff my ancestors built.
Very fucking cool stuff your ancestors
Oh
made.
yeah.
Yeah, not Giorgio, and not his band of clout-sharking aliens.
It is so cool that Slayer filmed their music video for Seasons in the Abyss in front of it. And that video is really fucking cool. They have a group of horsemen riding their horses through the band as they're playing. And it's just, how did they do that without killing anyone? And it's just right in front of the pyramids. They're just jamming out, playing some Slayer in front of the pyramids.
Follow-up question. Everybody says the same thing. It's like the pyramids are essentially right outside of Cairo. Like they're basically inside Cairo at this point.
Yeah.
But everyone also has the same picture of them sitting on a camel in front of the pyramids. Does that mean there's a dude with camel that's just like, come, sit on my camel, take the picture, and get the fuck off my camel?
Yeah. It's a huge tourist country. I mean, you go visit Egypt, there's Cairo, you go see the pyramids, you take Nile cruises on boats, and they serve you tea and lunch and dinner and whatever, and you take photos in front of the pyramids. You can go for camel rides too if you want. But there's a couple of guys, they hang out in front of the pyramids, and they're there for the photo opportunities. So
I no longer want to be a demon. I now want to be dude in front of pyramid with camel.
Yeah. Time for a change. Career change for you.
Oh, yeah.
And if you keep on funding us at patreon.com/ovpod, maybe one day in the future we'll be able to take a trip to Egypt to see the pyramids ourselves. And, kidnap camel guys so the demon can have a new job.
We've talked about sticking fingers in my socket. It's only so good.
Only so good is the name of your sex tape. And on that note, Miriam, thank you for coming on this episode with us. I don't think it would have been nearly as good if it was just me by myself on the internet for 20 hours researching this. I'm so glad that you did this episode with me, so thank you for bringing your perspective.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam.
Yay, I had so much fun doing this.
Good. You would best.
Alrighty, ending off the Pyramids episode, for Occulte Veritatis, I've been Ood Gallifrey.
I'm Leon Felger.
Well,
Richard Bigley.
Oh, hey, Sage Murray?
Am I also Sage Murray?
Sure. Join us.
Can I be Ood next time? I want to be Ood.
I'll be Richard Bigley.
Can we real quick just go through all of the hosts, but say someone else's name?
Sure, I'm the soundboard demon.
Leon.
Sage Murray!
Oh, God.
I'm the soundboard demon.
That makes me Leon, if Leon's the soundboard demon.
Ood Gallifrey.
Bye.
Love you.
Yep, bye-bye. Tune in for our Halloween episode. Hey, lovelies, it's been a long one. I'm going to give you a nice, quick palate cleanser that's also a bit different, and then a speedy after show, and then I'll see you again on Halloween for a special episode. Playing us out this week, this is a recreation of the chirp of 165-million-year-old katydid, developed by Chinese scientists from an exceptionally well-preserved specimen that they found. Enjoy, and see you in the after show. Hey, by the time you get this, there may only be a day or two left to influence these polls, but here is what the October 2021 future episode poll on our Patreon is shaping up to be at the end of the month here. For as little as $1 a month, you can also vote on what future episodes are going to be featured next. Maybe people could switch their votes at the last minute and sway the poll if they want to, but here's how it's shaping up on the morning that I'm recording this. In first place, the Oak Island Mystery, something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. Is it just a hole? We're going to talk about it. In second place is Atlantis.
wide open subject. We can talk about Plato talking about that society, all the way to the modern mysteries, to the myths about it being off the coast of Ireland. I haven't done the research yet. I will if it gets voted in. And then there's 3 other options that are in 4th and a tie for 5th place. Who knows? Maybe the vote could be swayed and maybe one of them will win. I've seen it in months before. So, yeah, if you want to join in and influence this poll, if one of those options sounds like something you'd like and you'd like to influence this poll, one vote may be enough to win by the end. Patreon.com/OVPod. Have a wonderful night. I've been Ood Gallifrey. Hey, you know what? You're doing real well today. I'm proud of you. See you on Halloween.